Well, hello everyone. My name's Sean Moore. I'm a first-year medical student here at Ohio State, and I'd just like to welcome you to the Ohio State College of Medicine's first ever Arthur N. Roop debate. Again, like I said, my name's Sean Moore, and I'm the chapter president of the Benjamin Rush Society here at OSU. My guess is that you've never heard of us, and that's actually because we're a brand new organization, and this is our inaugural event. This event is being co-hosted by the American Medical Student Association, and we'd especially like to thank Denise Fabian, who's the president of AMSA, and Tariq Azam, who is the legislative representative for their work. So this event really wouldn't have been possible without those two. So if you could help me by giving them a big round of applause, and I'm going to have Denise come and talk to you.
Thanks, Sean. I would like to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your support and your interest in this topic. The American Medical Student Association is a national student activist organization, and recently in 2002, we've had a campaign to create the Farm Free Act. And we are very excited to be working with the Benjamin Rush Association, and I'm very happy that Sean was able to bring this organization to OSU, because honestly, without him and all the work he put in, you guys wouldn't be here today. So I think he is the one who deserves the round of applause. So, yeah. Thank you once again, and I hope everyone enjoys the debate.
Okay, thank you, Denise. The reason I decided to open up a chapter of the Benjamin Rush Society here at OSU was to expose medical students to the different perspectives on issues surrounding the environments in which we're going to work eventually for the entirety of our career. I feel like as medical students, sometimes we tend to bury our heads in our books, and we don't quite understand the systems that we're going to be working in later in life and for the greatest part of our career. So tonight we actually have an issue that's going to be pertinent to about every single one of us, whether it be through consulting arrangements that you might have in the future with pharmaceutical and device companies, research funded through industry, or attempts to commercialize your own products that you invented in your labs, or simply just sales representatives coming into your office with a Hawaiian pizza and a Colgate smile trying to sell you their drugs. So one of Benjamin Rush Society's mottos is that we are committed to solving healthcare challenges through innovation, abundance, and an inviolate doctor-patient relationship. And we really believe that the issue tonight has a lot to do with everything mentioned above. Innovation, creating abundance, and protecting the doctor-patient relationship. And our goal for everyone is to come out of this with a better understanding of the topic and a general appreciation for the intellectual discourse which you are about to witness. So now for some important housekeeping items. This debate, like I said, is going to be decided by text voting, and instructions for how to vote are included on the first insert inside the brochures that you should have gotten. Now, did anybody not get a brochure? Everybody got one? We have some extras. Okay, I'm glad. Good job. So everybody got a brochure. So one thing to note, please make sure that you're using the correct codes for the pre-voting during the pre-vote, and obviously for the post-voting during the post-vote. And then another very important note, at any time during the debate, you may submit a question using the instructions in the middle of the how to vote section of the brochure. And then these will be read during the audience participation part of the debate, which we think is going to be a lot of fun. So this may be the only time ever that texting during class is considered good manners, and we really encourage you to do so that we can have a good discourse at the end. The winner of this debate will be the panelist who is able to sway more audience members to their side. So we're delighted that you all came out tonight to participate, especially the Med ones who have graciously taken time away from having panic attacks and hypertensive crises over NeuroBlock to come and share this experience with us. I'd also like to take this moment to thank the executive director of the National Benjamin Rush Society, Beth Haynes. She's sitting right there. And I'd also like to thank Dean Lockwood for coming out. I know both of these people have very busy schedules, so we thank them for being here. We think that you'll really enjoy this very unique panel that we've put together. And as we have Dean Poon, as well as Dr. Thomas and Dr. Stossel. And on that note, I'm humbled and honored to have the opportunity to introduce our moderator for the night. Christine A. Poon was appointed Dean and John W. Barry Sr. Chair in Business at the Max M. Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University in April of 2009. Dean Poon came to Fisher after a 30-year career in the healthcare industry, most recently as Vice Chairman and Worldwide Chairman of Pharmaceuticals at Johnson & Johnson. She served as a member of the company's Board of Directors and Executive Committee and was responsible for managing the pharmaceutical businesses of the company. Her areas of expertise include domestic and international business operations and sales and marketing. Dean Poon began her career at Johnson & Johnson in 2000 as Company Group Chairman of Pharmaceuticals and was appointed Worldwide Chairman of Pharmaceuticals in 2001. She was appointed Worldwide Chairman of Medicines and Nutritionals in 2003 and was named a Vice Chairman of the Board of Directors in 2005. In 2007, Dean Poon assumed responsibility for the Johnson & Johnson Development Corporation, the Corporate Office of Science and Technology, the Corporate Office of Information Management, Worldwide Procurement, and Worldwide Operations. So prior to joining Johnson & Johnson, Dean Poon spent 15 years at Bristol Myers Squibb, where her most recent position was President of International Medicines. Her career at Bristol Myers Squibb included marketing and strategic planning positions, including stints as President of Medical Devices and Senior Vice President for Canada and Latin America Pharmaceutical Operations. During Dean Poon's corporate career, she was routinely included in Fortune magazine's list of the 50 most powerful women in American business and Forbes' 100 most powerful women list. She was named Woman of the Year by the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association in 2004 and was named Business Leader of the Future by CNBC Wall Street Journal in 2005. Dean Poon received a BA in Biology from Northwestern University, an MA in Biology and Biochemistry from St. Louis University, and an MBA in Finance from Boston University. So needless to say, Dean Poon's extensive background in industry makes her the perfect choice as moderator for this debate. On a personal note, I've known Dean Poon since my days as an undergraduate youngster at the Fisher College of Business, and I can't tell you how infinitely gracious she's always been with me. She's absolutely beloved by everybody, students and faculty over at Fisher, and we are all extremely thankful for her presence tonight. So with all that, please give a warm welcome to Christine Poon, Dean of Fisher College of Business.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So tonight, our debate topic is going to be current financial conflict of interest policies create unjustified obstacles to medical innovation and the development of affordable, quality medical care. And I am delighted to introduce our two debaters tonight. Arguing in favor is Dr. Tom Stossel. And I just had the pleasure of just meeting Tom tonight. He is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and has degrees from both Princeton University and Harvard Medical School. He trained in internal medicine at Mass General and in hematology at Boston Children's and Peter Bent Brigham Hospitals. He was head of hematology and oncology at Mass General from 1976 until 1991, and is today currently the director of a new division of translational medicine. His basic research interests are in cell motility, and his policy interests are in physician and researcher interactions with private industry. I will not name all of the interests he's involved in, but to suffice it to say that he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a member of the Institute of Medicine. Now, arguing in opposition is our own Dr. Andrew Thomas. Andy is an associate professor of clinical internal medicine here at Ohio State, and also has degrees both from Harvard and from Ohio State University. He is currently in charge of all medical staff, nursing, and administrative leaders looking to enhance the quality and safety of patient care and the level of customer service within the university hospital, and to provide solutions for medical staff issues. He is a nationally recognized leader in graduate medical education. He has served on the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, Institutional Review Committee from 2004 to 2012, and is the vice chairman of the IRC, served that from 2007 to 2011. He hails from Louisville, and since coming to Ohio State, he's completed both his medical degree and his internal medicine residency. And I am proud to say that he is also a proud graduate of Fisher College with his MBA. And so he will be arguing on in the opposition. So now, at this point, we are supposed to take a pre-debate vote. This is when you can text. So take out your phones and your devices, follow the instructions, and tell us kind of where you stand before you hear from our debaters. Okay, so in the audience, these are absolute numbers, not percentages. So 28 folks agree. They would argue in the affirmative. 14 disagree. They would argue in the opposition. And 23 are still undecided. Okay, so that's great. You know, before I start, just a little bit about, I think, why this topic is so important, why this topic is so interesting, and why this topic, in the few minutes that we have to debate, does not do justice to the topic. I'm old enough to remember the days when having a diagnosis of HIV was truly a death sentence. And I was working in the pharmaceutical industry at the time, and it was, for those of us who were involved in this, truly a remarkable time. A time when scientists, when academics, when the pharmaceutical industry, where the FDA, where the government took every unprecedented action to take these products and these ideas and get them to the market as quickly as possible, where everything from speed and pricing were under the microscope. I think of those days as some of the proudest moments of academics, industry, and government working together. It's the meaning of how you bring medical innovation. And on the other side, I would say that that process would have been completely undermined if the parties did not trust each other, or if the very patients that we were bringing these products to the market didn't trust the various stakeholders. And I think that's the essence tonight of what we're going to talk about. So let me begin by just saying that the format is going to work where Dr. Stossel will be the first to speak. He'll speak in the affirmative for 5 minutes. Dr. Thomas then will have 8 minutes to rebut. Dr. Stossel will come back for his 8 minutes. Dr. Thomas will come back for his 8 minutes, and finally, Dr. Stossel will come back for his last 3 minutes. Then I will try to get them to talk to each other in a civil way for about 10 minutes, and then you'll have a chance to engage in the conversation with each other or with them, and then we'll do one last post-debate voting. All right, so that's the agenda for tonight. And so let me start by inviting Dr. Stossel to begin.
Well, thank you, Dean Poon, and I want to thank the Rush Society for organizing this and Ohio State for hosting it. And now I got to get cranking because I've got to make a bunch of points in 5 minutes. So I've been in medicine for almost 50 years. And medicine is incomparably better today than when I started out. And there's one reason for it. And that one reason is what I call the medicine industry interface. It's delivered drugs, devices, biologicals, imaging widgets, communication modalities, and there is just no doubt about that. Unfortunately, those advances which have prolonged life and improved life quality come very hard. They are extremely difficult and extremely expensive. Some of you may have heard that 1 in 8,000 identified compounds as a drug candidate gets FDA approved. 50% of phase 3 projects in development fail. And it's that failure that drives the immense cost. So the industry has to be profitable. And the industry actually, propaganda to the contrary notwithstanding, is not all that profitable. Now, unless Ohio State is a glaring exception, students, physicians, academics, and the public are abjectly ignorant about what it takes to get products to market, especially about the economics. And it is that ignorance that has driven an assault on the interface between medicine and industry. And that assault goes under the code name conflict of interest. Now, the promoters of what I call the conflict of interest movement come in two flavors. One I call instigators. Now, some of the instigators are committed anti-industry ideologues. They want complete apartheid. But most of the instigators are self-serving careerists, academics, journal managers who are in the information business that they want to monopolize. Of course, so Congress people, politicians like Senator Grassley, who is demagogue this, the media, of course, that loves corruption, whether it exists or not, and the biggest instigator class is the legal profession. Now, the second flavor of promoter is what I call enablers. Enablers profess to be different than the instigators. They talk the talk. We must work with industry, but we must work with transparency, with objectivity, with trustworthiness. And school's out, because as soon as that rhetoric comes out, the instigators can come in and make anything look opaque, biased, or untrustworthy. So what justifies the movement that has gone forth and basically brought us to a place where all relationships between industry and medicine are disclosed, managed, or eliminated? Not very much. The empiric evidence is pretty bad. So specific adverse incidents, quantitatively paltry, qualitatively not what they're cracked up to be. So what are we talking about? Why are we having this debate? Well, it's because the movement has thrived, and it's thrived because the instigators live off of it. It's thrived because there are elements of the history of medicine that accommodate it. And most of all, it's the failure to pay attention. And nothing more graphically illustrates the attention problem that you had to cart somebody from Boston to come here and to debate this side of the story. So finally, the costs. The conflict of interest movement has costs. It has already eroded medical education, and I believe it is eroding and will continue to erode medical innovation. Now, obviously, I haven't said much of anything very specific. I can't in 5 minutes, but I really hope that we will get to those, as many of those specifics as possible, and I really look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Now let me turn the debate over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Dean Poon. Thank you all for coming this evening. I have to say that this kind of a turnout at 6:30 in the evening on a topic like this is really a great sign that we have engaged medical students, a number of engaged faculty. I do have to say, of all the votes of the 28, 14, and 23, the one I'm most interested in is Dr. Lockwood. So my job is to try and sway him to my side, I'm guessing. But, so anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. When you look at the debate topic, in my mind, the most important word in that debate topic is unjustified. The concept of whether limits on the relationships between faculty and industry are justified or unjustified. I could come up with some limits that would be unjustified. In fact, we as an organization have made the determination that there are some limits that other institutions have implemented as faculty rules or ethical principles, et cetera, that we have not adopted as an organization, feeling that they would be unjustified in stifling innovation. However, I can't sit and watch a profession or watch an institution like ours have no rules at all. That's why I was actually very involved in putting together the policy that has currently been in place here at the Medical Center since 2009, with an idea of providing guardrails for activities. So it's not tight down into a single lane footpath. It's guardrails on a 3 or 4 lane wide highway that allow our faculty to have relationships with industry, to have transparency for those relationships, and to have those members of the faculty who do discover new ideas that are patentable, that are commercializable, to have some personal financial gain from the intellectual property that's developed, and certainly to have some financial gain for their time and effort in working with industry. So in my mind, if you step back for a second and think of a time, and this is kind of hard to fathom, think if today the profession of medicine didn't exist. No one had ever been a doctor before, and you were going to start this as a new profession. And you were going to go out and start talking to groups in the community and start talking to public officials because you need to create a license for your profession. And you're going to basically start talking about this new job where people will come into your office, people will tell you stories about their life that they don't tell their their spouse, they don't tell their children, they don't tell friends. They will disrobe in front of you. They'll talk about bodily functions that aren't to be talked about in polite company. In fact, every now and then, they're going to allow someone like Dr. Capers to stick a needle with a wire in it all the way up to your heart and do things, or Dr. Ruberg to take a scalpel and cut into your face or to your body, sometimes take out pieces parts. I think we would have a hard time as a profession to create ourselves today. There would be so much distrust. There would be so many questions from people about where did we get these ideas? How did we come up with these ideas? Where is the science coming from this? That I think personally we couldn't recreate the profession of medicine in today's media and social culture if we tried. Therefore, when I think about the ethics of the profession of medicine that I learned here, sitting in this same classroom, and that I've tried to live day to day and try to teach the students and residents that I work with, I think of the profession of medicine, our relationship with patients, as something sacrosanct because it could not be rebuilt even if we tried. So what is the foundation of that profession? There are a variety of ways you can spin this. You can talk about beneficence, doing well for others, or non-maleficence, which is doing no harm. But in my mind, the real reality comes down to the fiduciary relationship we have with patients. So the concept that there's an inequality in information between what the doctor knows and the patient knows. And it is incumbent upon us as professionals to always be attempting to make decisions in the best interest of the other, in the best interest of the patient, not always in the best interest of ourselves. Now, at the same time, of course, we deserve to be paid for what we do. We deserve to be well paid for what we do. It's many years of study that get you to be a physician, many years of hard work. At the same time, we don't get to make decisions based on just what would benefit us, but it's more what benefits the patient. So if you take that then into the world of research, into the world of clinical innovation, where we're doing new things for patients, it's quite important, I think, to have some bright lines between what is ethical and what is not ethical, what is allowed and what is not allowed, when physicians are going to be working with industry to create a new device, to create a new procedure, to create a new medication that may benefit them or that may benefit the company that they're working with. Patients need to have the reassurance that someone, whether it's an IRB, whether it is an institutional ethics committee, whether it is, hopefully it won't need to be the federal government or the state government, is looking out for their best interests. So in my mind, in an institution like ours, if we don't have some rules, once again, justified rules in place, we run the risk of losing the public's confidence in what we do and losing their trust. So what we have advocated for as an organization is the concept of transparency. Dr. Stossel feels that that is more, I think maybe window dressing might be a good word, for protecting patients. But we do believe that the disclosure of conflicts of interest internally, to have the ability to manage them if needed, is an important part of protecting patients, important part of protecting our institution, so that in this community, people feel safe coming here for their care. We have put some limits in place around fair market value for the time that our faculty spend as a consultant or an advisor to a company. that the work that the pay that our faculty receive to be advisors or consultants is commensurate for the work that they've done. Sitting for 2 hours a year passively on a conference call with 50 other people on it and getting paid $20,000 a year doesn't seem like that's commensurate with the work that you've done. But there are many other scenarios where $20,000 a year would be a small price to pay for the expertise of one of our faculty sitting around the table at a company for hours and hours helping them with their products. So we have, for example, allowed our faculty to be on speakers bureaus of industry companies. However, they can't receive a retainer for being on the speakers bureau. They only can be paid for the speeches that they actually do. Once again, we feel justified rules to allow both for transparency as well as the disclosure of conflicts, and then to allow our organization to manage those conflicts as we see fit internally as an organization. And with that, I'll pass back to my partner.
All right. So, Dr. Stossel, now you have your first time to rebut Dr. Thomas.
So, I probably should have paid closer attention to the title of the debate because it's a little vague, but I don't know what unjustified limits really means. Let's just say I'm not in favor of anarchy. I'm in favor of good medical care and improving quality and longevity of life. And I'm also in favor of if people do bad things, you take them out and shoot them. If they do dumb things, you try to educate them, and if they aren't educable, you fire them. That's therapeutic law. That's not prophylactic law. So some of you folks are going to drive home, and it's late, and you want to get home, and so you drive a little over the speed limit. If you get unlucky, a cop will nail you. Probably won't happen, but there's no law that says you can't drive a fast car. And that's what we've evolved to. Now, having immersed myself in this gets discussed, as Andy did, as a matter of ethics. I'm all for ethics. We all have ethics. But medicine in general and the medicine industry interface is a hugely complex, granular organism. The devil is in the details. What Ruberg does, what the cardiologist does, they're not in the same universe. And you have to get down and drill exactly what it is. And that's what I worry about when committees form and are going to, from 1,000 miles up, decide, well, is this fiduciary responsibility working or not? And speaking of fiduciary responsibility, anybody been to the airport lately? You seen that huge sign for OSU up as you walk out the door? Or they said, who regulates that? What's the fiduciary responsibility to patients about, come get your mammogram at James? Anyway.
Is Kathleen from marketing still here? No, she was earlier.
But Andy kindly did send me the vendor policy and some of the things that he talked about, and I think it's fine to have a policy. But I want to, my problem with it is, and it's better than a lot, certainly better than one we have, but not so bad ain't good enough. It should be really good, and that's the opportunity for the D. Now, where did we get to the point where we're being ethical, we're exercising a fiduciary responsibility by telling people where they can have lunch and who can pay for the lunch? This is not a problem in most of the economy. I got to tell you a story. So I converted from my youthful cluelessness to know something about industry when I joined the scientific advisory board of the pioneering biotech company Biogen. So I know a lot about the early history of that company. So when it started out, a Nobel Prize winner, Wally Gilbert, said, we got genetic engineering. It's going to be great. But nobody really knew what it was that they were going to come up with. So, but he really socked it to those investors. Boy, they thought this was the greatest thing. All this money came in, and he'd fly these leading researchers and doctors to Aruba. And they'd sit around the pool drinking Mai Tais and deciding, what are we going to do? They were on retainer. Nobody had a clue that anything would work. Now, one of the folks there was a microbiologist from Edinburgh named Ken Murray. And Ken Murray is talking to a virologist from Munich who says, you know, Ken, you ought to clone the hepatitis B virus. Really? What's hepatitis B? Oh, it's a bad disease, he learns. So Biogen pays him because he's got to do his academic advantage. He can't drop everything and clone the hepatitis B. He's got to, so they hire extra people. He's still doing his academic promotion stuff. He clones the hepatitis B virus. It turns out to be the stuff that becomes the hepatitis B vaccine. It's licensed back to Biogen. Biogen licensed it to a pharmaceutical company. It becomes worldwide. Hepatitis B is the largest major cause of cancer in the world, causes hepatoma. It will be eradicated thanks to this work. Well, Ken got filthy rich, Biogen got rich. It was win-win all the way around because he had stock in Biogen and the stock appreciated. There were no committees sitting there and saying, well, you know, these are pretty big numbers and I don't know if we can trust this. The value for humanity is incalculable. We got off cheap with what Ken did. Now that's a sort of extreme example, but I just worry about price controls. Now fair market value is interesting because this is disingenuous because the companies love fair market value. They can get us for cheap. And I know a famous device surgeon who used to ship him and his wife over to Europe to give lectures on the procedures that he developed. And they said, no, can't send the wife anymore, and we got to ramp down your honorarium because we're, I hope we'll talk about later, under a consent decree from the lawyers. I said, ain't worth it. I'm not going anymore. How are we better off? People in Europe aren't learning about this procedure. So I come back to, if bad things happen, if people do bad things, it's usually pretty obvious. That's how we manage research misconduct. That's how we manage malpractice. Let's do it after the fact. Let's stop trying to second guess on the basis of what's really institutional protectionism, because the enablers that I referred to, with all due apologies to the dean, have to convince me that they really care about whether I discover anything in the next 10 years, that they don't really care that Grassley doesn't send them a letter or that they show up on the front page of the New York Times. So I'll subside on that.
You have another minute.
I know, well, I'm burned out.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Thomas, your last 8 minutes to speak for the opposition.
Thank you. So I think to move forward on something that is unique to us, when we talked last week about our debate tonight, one of the things I think that is unique to Ohio State is the fact that we're a public institution. It is certainly a difference from not so much a conflict of interest perspective, but from what we term a conflict of commitment perspective. Now, certainly, any institution expects their faculty to be committed to the institution's goals and mission, just as we would expect our faculty to be committed to that. In fact, that's why one of the rules in our faculty senate policies allow faculty to consult up to 1 day per week with industry as an advisor or consultant, so that we are taking our new knowledge and getting it out into the real world, and it's not just staying in the ivory tower. That being said, as a public institution, we do get, although it's a lot less than it used to be, some support from the state. And there is some expectation that those state dollars will not be used to forward the interests of private companies without there being great transparency for that, without there being an understanding of how these dollars are being used. So if a faculty member is using their state time to do private work, whether they're personally enriching themselves through salary, or whether they're developing something that a private company will then make a profit on, the state has an interest in, since they've invested those dollars, in getting something back. So the conflict of commitment is certainly an issue at any institution, but in our case, because they're state resources, there is a larger entity at work in that the state insists that we follow certain rules that any state employee follow, that are determined by the Ohio Ethics Commission and other groups. Some of you may remember a few years ago, our own governor was actually pulled into court for accepting rounds of golf from lobbyists. Certainly a different issue than a doctor accepting pay from an industry company, but it just goes to show you how seriously the Ohio Ethics Commission takes what it does. I actually think, and we can get into this maybe more in the discussion section, an even more interesting topic moving forward will be how we manage actual institutional conflicts of interest. So right now, if the institution invests in a company or an idea that a faculty member develops, suddenly does the institution as a whole, does the medical center, does the university become conflicted about the success of that product or the success of that idea as it's commercialized? Will we have to have new and different ways that will make sure we're managing the conflicts at the institutional level so that the IRB or the ethics committee or the dean or whoever it might be tempted to look the other way if somebody's cutting corners because it's going to enrich the institution? That's an even more complex topic and one that maybe we can get into a little bit in the discussion. But I'll just summarize in my last few minutes that my point in this debate is not that there need to be rules that completely limit the interaction between industry representatives and physicians, whether they be on a faculty or in private practice. Some institutions have made the decision to go that route. We have not. However, as I said, I think the key word in that debate topic is justified. I believe we as an organization have done our best, both in terms of educating our faculty, educating our residents, and trying to role model the best behaviors for our medical students to show that there are some justified rules about interactions between industry and physicians or faculty in general. Those would be some limits for fair market value pay that's commensurate for the work being done, the fact that you not be paid a retainer just for being on our Speakers Bureau versus being paid for actual work you do flying somewhere. We actually have some other rules that are in place as well, that if you are consulting for General Electric on their new CAT scan, you can't be involved in influencing institutional dollars on which next CAT scan we buy. It just kind of makes sense. You've kind of picked a team to be on. Therefore, your ability to objectively rate the new technology on the market from other vendors in comparison to the one that you've helped develop, you've suddenly lost your objectivity. So we have to be very careful, once again, with state and institutional resources. So we ask those people to recuse themselves from that involvement on those sorts of purchasing committees or that purchasing process. So in essence, what we've tried to do with our faculty is not say no, but say how. To let them understand the implications of the decisions they make, to let them understand that we do expect transparency and we expect people to disclose what those conflicts are. And when those conflicts are significant, we will help manage those, whether it's disclosing those to patients, whether it's disclosing those to the IRB for new research that you do, whether it's disclosing those to the NIH or other organizations that will be giving us grants in the future. So it's not about draconian rules versus a completely open market. In my mind, it comes down to that word justified versus unjustified. And I feel what we've done as an institution is take a justified stance when it comes to these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. And Dr. Stossel, your last 3 minutes.
Okay, well, as I said, the policy isn't terrible, but one thing I look at is the references. So if you look, one of the references, and this gets back to the lunch business, this is why I think it isn't justified. It has less to do with the specifics of who's buying the lunch than the intellectual honesty. And the reference is to the American Association of Medical Colleges Symposium on the Science of Reciprocity and Influence. Does anybody know what that's about?
Yes.
Do you really know what it's about?
The brain MRI imaging?
Well, there's the brain MRI imaging, but there's the guessing how many coins there are in a jar. You know, this is being extrapolated to the behavior of doctors is outrageous. And that if what we consider ourselves to be an evidence-based enterprise, that for that to take on the seriousness that is, when I debate this and when I talk about this, that's what they all throw at me. Oh, there's very important social science research that supports this. That's nonsense. So I just have to say something about the state. You told me about this, the governor. I mean, the governor didn't get impeached. No. A lot of this is about political backstabbing and whatnot. I think the state of Ohio really wants better innovation, better education. That's what they care about. They care about that a lot more than they care about a lot of the ethical window dressing. So I'm going to end where I started. This is hard. It is hard to innovate, and I didn't really get to emphasize educate. Educate. You've got so much stuff you got to keep track of, and it's so difficult to do. And the restrictions that I view it's like a soccer game. It's a small goal, low scoring, and you got to have as many shots on goal as you can if you're going to win. And if you make the goals a little bit smaller, I would argue there's a disproportionate decrease in the chances that you're going to score. And so that to maximize our chances of innovation and education, I think we got to give people as much freedom as they possibly can have as few people second guessing what you're going to do. When it's obvious that you're doing something bad, like I said before, then it's time to take action, not prophylactically.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. We're going to go into this next phase where we're going to be able to get into a dialogue now with the debaters. So I think you have in your packages an opportunity to ask a question. So if you'd rather write your question down, write it down and we'll get it. If you're comfortable just raising your hand, we can do that. And I'll start it off by asking our debaters, you know, these conflict of interest regulations have been gaining steam in academic circles and industry circles, maybe for the last 15 years. It's about my memory of it. And we clearly have seen some intended and unintended consequences of some of the regulations. So could you talk to us, each other, the audience, about some of the unintended consequences, good and bad, that this regulation has had on both innovation and healthcare, actual patient care?
Sociologists have told me it's really hard to codify what doesn't happen. So it's very difficult to put numbers on the downside effects, although there are some. I'll come to that. I don't see the upside, other than it's been a career opportunity for instigators. The downside has to do with what I think is probably the major damage that has come out of it. Now, you're all familiar with these, you read in the paper about these huge settlements that the pharmaceutical and device companies have made with the federal prosecutors. And the way the media presents it is this tendentious rhetoric, crackdown, fraud, allegations, and it's always a little bit qualified, but there's enough of those kind of adjectives in there. They did something bad, there's no question about it. And then, of course, the settlement fines are in the billions. It's added up now to 13 billion. Almost every large company has been sued. And so this is taken as the smoking gun for the venality of the industry, and that's why the medical profession needs to stay clear of it to retain its ethical purity. The fact is, this is one of those things that's not what it's cracked up to be. Now, I'm sure you all know that no company can sell any product until it's been FDA approved. But once it's approved, a physician can prescribe it for anything. The company, however, cannot market the product for what it hasn't been approved for, although there are exceptions. And for years, the FDA and the companies sort of negotiated around those exceptions. And if the companies pushed the envelope too far, the FDA would fine the companies for the amount of sales they made for the unapproved uses. And then in the early 2000s, creative legal strategy came into play, where the prosecutors used what's called the False Claims Act. Now, the False Claims Act is for people who bill the government for stuff they don't do. And they used an artful mix of civil and criminal charges against the companies for off-label prosecution. Now, the thing about the False Claims Act that's different from the FDA law is that the False Claims Act has 3 elements. One is that you can use a whistleblower. So a whistleblower gets 30% of the take, and in those numbers, that's huge. The second element is there are treble damages, triple damages. It's not just, so it's what the company sold times 3. That's why the fines are so big. So I'll come back to the third element, which is the most important, in a second. So the prosecutor goes to Pfizer, say, and says, I got a whistleblower here who says that you were off-label marketing rutabaga. And the problem is that the company isn't doing the promotion. It isn't doing the billing. It's the doctor who wrote the prescription. So the dots that have to be connected are that it was the marketing that led the doctor to do the illegal prescription. And they bring in this social science stuff, the conflict of interest rhetoric, to say that this is how it works. Now, the Pfizer defense person said, well, you can't win a case like that. They gave me a slice of pizza and I uncontrollably prescribed. I'm so dumb and gullible that I did that. Well, it's that third element that comes in. He says, well, you'll probably win, but if you lose, there's this punishment I have that's called debarment. How many of you know what debarment is? That's a problem. I've never seen it mentioned in the New York Times or in the other articles. Debarment means Pfizer or Merck cannot do any business with the federal government. No Medicare, no Medicaid for any of its products. That's why every one of these cases settles. This is a prosecutorial extortion racket. And what it's done is it's tied these companies into knots. They're under what are called corporate integrity agreements. And as a result, corporate support for continuing medical education has gone down 30% in the last 4 years. They're no longer supporting fellowships because it's so easy for these prosecutors to come out and take this very weak and soft evidence and turn it into a $1 billion price tag. That's not good. Now, 30% drop in CME might not be a problem here. You've got plenty of people that you can roust out to talk, but I'd say out in the boonies or Michigan City, Indiana, where my in-laws live, I think it's a problem. So that is a huge cost, and I think that is probably the most damaging aspect of this whole thing.
So your sense of some of the unintended consequences are how quickly does new medical information diffuse into either our students or into the practicing physician out in the community. It's huge implications in terms of education, and huge implications, I think, even in, you and I were talking earlier about the FDA advisory boards, which are really some of the most important boards in the approval of any new innovation out there. And these days, most of these seats go vacant because of many of these conflict of interest laws. So clearly there's some unintended consequences that I don't think any of the regulators intended these things to happen.
I would agree that there are unintended consequences and some that are difficult. I think the folks at AMSA, I know they're partly sponsoring tonight, I think for very good and well-intentioned reasons came out with a scorecard a number of years ago that ranked the policies, conflict of interest policies of institutions. But I think we've seen unintended consequences with politicians grandstanding based on that. Senator Grassley sent a letter to, I believe there were 24 medical schools that didn't have a policy like 3 or 4 years ago that was on the AMSA website, and sent a letter from the Senate Finance Committee to each of those deans saying, why don't you have a policy and why didn't you submit it to AMSA? I mean, actually, to be honest, we talk about this internally. I don't know why a state legislator hasn't figured out that this is a great issue to push and isn't talking about this at the State House every day. In my mind, this is a no-brainer to get good media coverage. So we actually feel like we're relatively prepared if that happens, but at the same time, why someone in Ohio hasn't, I don't know. Though in my mind, one of the biggest unintended consequences is the activity of working with industry is demonized in the press to a degree where I think some of our experts don't want to make their activities, even if they are ethical and signed off on, they don't want to make those public.
Right.
In my mind, if I were a patient, I would definitely want to be taken care of by an expert. I would want to be reassured that the person who was replacing my hip or doing my heart cath was someone who actually was so expert in this, they had figured out this technology. Where I think oftentimes our physicians then hide their light under a bushel because they are actually concerned. Now, I typically would tell them that if the patient is going to not want you to do their procedure because of that conflict of interest, that's definitely the person you want to tell, because you've already had the conflict
Right.
of interest.
Right.
So you might as well disclose it to them. If they want to walk away from you and you're the expert, well, it's one less procedure you have going for you. But at the same time, that's the patient, if there is a problem or a mistake, that's the first thing the trial lawyer is going to bring out is your relationship. So being transparent actually brings the discussion to a head so you can actually make your case to the patient. So I think those are the unintended consequences that make people really hesitant to even talk about this issue.
Yeah. You know, there's a movement, of course, in the nation, not just of regulations here, but general regulations, and they call it sort of this common sense approach. And it sounds to me like Ohio State has taken a much more common sense approach to regulations.
We're trying, but to be honest, we even have some discussions that, in my mind, come out of like George Orwell in 1984. We had a discussion from very well-intended people who understand the federal rules and are trying to keep us out of trouble, that we potentially, so the FDA collects information from companies that make medications and companies that make devices that they regulate about what are called SPOOS payments, or special payments from others of other sorts or from other sources. That would be, for example, a development gift that a manufacturing company might give to a division or a department or even to an individual faculty member that's a development gift, just a gift to the university with nothing in return. But because the FDA collects that information, and the NIH also collects information about who's doing research on what drugs and devices, we have a fear that without merging our own databases on the back end, that we could potentially have problems going on, because it depends on how closely you define the unit. If you think about the Department of Medicine, we have, 250 faculty. Someone doing research in the Cancer Center versus somebody over in the Lung Center, they are like soup and nuts. But at the same time, in the federal government's mind, they're in the same department, they're working out of the same practice corporation when they bill, they're within the same institution. It looks as if there could potentially be a conflict. Now, if we're partners and he's getting a $100,000 donation and I'm doing research from the same company and we have offices right next to each other, that might be something we want to think about managing. But to some degree, we may not even have the information internally because the development people aren't really talking to the research compliance people. So there's a lot of unintended consequences like that that we feel we need to be prepared for.
Yeah. Let me turn it to the audience and see if the audience has any observations, questions. Yes, back here.
Dr. Thomas briefly touched on this, and I wanted to get Dr. Stossel's response. So whether or not if you disagree with the goal of these so-called instigators, they're out there. And the media, if they find something that looks like a conflict of interest, they'll latch on to it and explode into a big story. So would you, I just want to hear your position on whether you think that having these policies in place would actually protect people from prosecution and actually protect public trust if they know that companies and doctors were working inside these pre-existing guidelines. So.
Well, first of all, it's quite astonishing that, considering the lack of balance in the messaging over the last 20 years, how the public doesn't care. The public doesn't have a trust problem. The instigators and the enablers say that they do all the time, but Gallup polls repeatedly show that the esteem of physicians hasn't changed in 20 years. Research America, which is an NIH advocacy organization, has done polls, and that 85% of respondents believe that industry and physicians should work together. As far as what the media says, I mean, if you're having a heart attack, do you go to the New York Times? No, you go to your doctor, and you're not very interested in. Most patients feel that way. Now, if you want to get a headache, read the final rule of the Physician Payments Sunshine Act that just came out a few weeks ago. It's almost 300 pages long. It is loaded with minutia. They say it's going to cost $180 million a year to enforce. That's a gross underestimate because that's bean counters. So the rule, for those who don't know about it, any payment of greater than $10 will be reported to a searchable website. And and as far as you can disclose to your patients till the cows come home. If there's a bad outcome, the tort lawyers will be all over that website seeing that you took a pen, there are no pens anymore, but whatever it is you took, and they'll use it in their lawsuit against you.
So I have some good questions here. Let me ask the, two here, and then we'll go back to the audience. These came from you, by the way. Dr. Thomas, who regulates the objectivity of the regulators? What credentials make them worthy to dictate rules to others?
Someone was crazy enough to appoint me chair of a committee, I guess. No,
You're the man.
We have a small group of folks internally. There's a committee called the Professionalism Council that was actually set up in about 2005 under Dr. Lucine, Dr. Stone. That actually started a lot of this work. I was actually chairing the business ethics subcommittee of that group is how I came to chair the committee that wrote the policy. But we have a small group of folks internally. Actually, Amita Cooper is here in the audience, is our general counsel, is one of those folks. A couple of our attorneys. We've called on Dr. Ruberg in the past. We've called on Clay Marsh, who was our vice dean for research in the past, for help when it comes down to interpreting these rules. And we, like I said, we really try to not say no, but to say how. So we're regulating, I guess, behavior, but only telling people what the implications of their actions would be, as opposed to saying they should or shouldn't or can or can't do what they've been asked to do. That being said, we have seen some contracts where literally the contract is, on the company's side, has been written and will be signed by the director of marketing for the drug company and the physician, as opposed to anything on the science or research side. So there have been times when we said, I really wouldn't do this, or I'd advise you not to, but at the same time, we let them do that if they want to.
Can I add something to that? One of the things that's too bad, is, even though it would be very hard, is that these rules, particularly on the research side, have been around for 25 years. And we have no information as to what impact they've had. And I'm trying to figure out how to go about doing it. I mean, I know for a fact, anecdotally, that companies, startups did not happen because we have a rule that you can't have sponsored research and equity from a company. And it's so hard to get investment. I mean, and the investor says, well, look, I want Andy to be involved in this. He's passionate about it. And I don't have cash. I want to give him equity. I give him a little bit of research sponsor. No, can't do that. So he said, well, I'm not starting that company. Now, most companies fail, but it could be the next Amgen. We don't know. And so I really wish we had more information about that. I think even the prospect of it is a problem.
Let me ask this question, and this is directed to Dr. Thomas, but I think Dr. Stossel, you'll have something to say about this. So it says, why is industry cooperation considered subject to regulation by conflict of interest policies? Yet, the NIH grants, and I think this is, and cooperatives within the government, which essentially opens the door to policymakers picking and choosing which studies or projects are funded, ultimately affecting the evidence in evidence-based medicine? That's
a great question. I think how the NIH runs, there's other people that are a lot more expert than I am on that, and probably some folks in the audience. But from what I understand of how the NIH runs, they have study sections of people that come in from across the country to advise them on what sorts of grants to put out. But there's no doubt that the NIH process is very political. We've seen that when you mentioned HIV research earlier. Clearly, if you think back to the mid-1980s and the political stigma around HIV research that really took a lot of very brave people to push through about whether the NIH should be funding that at all at that time. And certainly, there are a lot of orphan diseases out there that don't have the political pressure that people are suffering from, but we don't fund research for those. And to some degree, in the private market as well, if there's not a big market for the drug, someone's not going to invest $100 million in creating the new drug. So I'm not a Pollyanna. I know the world is not perfect. At the same time, I think that we probably are doing okay with how we're doing it. But I'd love to hear ideas that people have on other ways to potentially do that.
Well, I know all about the NIH. I have successfully panhandled from the NIH for 40 plus years. And if I write another grant, shoot me. But so the people who worship peer review are the people who live off of it, as opposed to the people who suffer under it. It's it's like democracy. It's okay. It's sort of grassroots, but it is very political. And I have a talk I give that says research is necessary for innovation, but research is not innovation. Innovation, it gets into that skill set that I talked about. Now, I don't know how many of you have NIH grants or applying for NIH grants. The pay line is now less than 10%. And believe me, we got the sequester going now. I hope the dean has a big slush fund to bail the faculty out. So why aren't we going after more industry? Why are we beating up on the one source? The industry funds twice as much research than all other sources put together. What exactly why are we shooting ourselves in the foot? Now, one thing I just want to say, it's not that industry is wonderful, because industry is shooting itself in the head. They don't defend themselves, they don't explain themselves. I could tell you stories about sort of dysfunctional behavior that sort of with respect to I'm trying to help them and they kick me around. But I think that the idea that that we're going to let abstract ethical considerations get in the way of what we're really trying to do, which is to innovate, educate, and care for patients, is crazy.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, way in the back there.
Okay, Dr. Stossel started with a story about the beginnings of Biogen, and I'm wondering, based on current rules, would it be possible for a scientist and a physician from two different countries to meet to discuss basic science without a stated objective over Mai Tais around a pool in Aruba? Could that happen? If it could happen, then what's the problem with current regulations? And if it couldn't happen, is there something else that would work just as well for innovation?
Well, I mean, it's a total hypothetical. There's no way to know. It's a totally different time, it's different circumstances, it's really hard to concoct it. But there are only so many hours in the day, we have so many pressures on us, we've got to be compensated, and so you look and say, well, gee, if you ask me to be on this advisory board, but I have to write my grants, I have to see my patients, I have to do this and that. At some point, there's a tipping point. It's like the surgeon I talked about who said it's not worth it to me anymore. I think we have sort of tended in that direction. Now you hear stories about a colleague, an oncologist, was at a meeting in Europe where they're planning a clinical trial. It's in Europe. And they hand out the dinners, and they say, oh, you're from Massachusetts. See, we have this gift ban law in Massachusetts. We're way ahead of Ohio. So he had to go out and buy his own lunch and bring it in. Now, does that mean he's not going to do it anymore? I don't know. But why are we going there? I mean, it's the fact that some lawyer figured out that he didn't deserve the lunch, and that's resources that are being diverted from much better. That's the biggest problem with the Sunshine Act. Even if it is $200 million, that's $200 million. It's not going to research, development, and education.
I have had faculty members call me frantically at 8 a.m. on a certain morning, and they're out of town at a meeting, and they run into a friend from residency, and they say, oh, a bunch of us are meeting for dinner. Why don't you come along? And they show up, and it's actually a drug rep buying 5 doctors dinner, but that doctor doesn't feel like they want to be like, oh, I can't do it. So they call me the next day all worried that they've broken the rules. And basically, usually what I say is, you still have the drug rep's card, and they always do. And I say, just call them and ask them what the total dinner was and send them a check for 1/6 of whatever it was. And so it seems really kooky to have to do that, to be honest. I mean, I feel kind of like I'm treating them like they're my teenager at home when I have to say that. But that is kind of what our rules are. I think the reality about the Biogen example, not knowing all the details of it, is being on an advisory board, at least at our institution, is not disallowed. So if you have a valid reason to be at that advisory board meeting, now Tahiti might be, or Aruba, wherever it was, might be the, maybe say it's in Naples or say it's in, in San Diego, you should still very much be able to interact with other people, hopefully through that, other experts in your field, through that sort of activity. But are there certainly people, such at Harvard, who might be more limited from being able to do that than other people? Definitely, under the current rules.
Just got to say about the Aruba thing. I mean, it just amazes me. Where is it written that, let's say education, in a monastery, sitting on a bed of nails, wearing a hair shirt that you paid for yourself is better than going to a nice restaurant or a nice resort? Why shouldn't education be pleasant and easy, where you can network? Networking is so important in this whole thing, and on every aspect of medicine, and we demonize that. This is okay in the whole rest of the economy. But I mean, this Sunshine Act thing, this is the biggest intrusion of privacy of a single group since the history of the Republic. I mean, and we just rolled over for it.
I think if you look back into the late 1980s, there were times when doctors were getting frequent flyer miles from drug companies for prescribing certain medications. So all you need to do is write a company's drug, and you would get, because they were tracking how many prescriptions you wrote, you get frequent flyer miles. There were a lot of, what's that?
Is that true?
That is true.
Yeah.
Not by my company.
Not by your company,
Yeah.
no. But you know, so once again, I think the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And I think in a Wild West where there aren't rules, I unfortunately think people will revert back to what can I get out of this. I've had drug reps tell me that before the kind of most recent recycling of the rules in 2000, that they would come in and want to see a doc, and the doc would say, what are you going to give me today? You know, the guy last week was offering me luggage. I want whatever. I mean, so I think it's
yeah, you know, that's the anecdote thing. I mean, I'm sure this happened, and you know, bribery is illegal. That sounds like bribery. They should have been taken out and shot. You know, if given frequent
I think they were.
miles for prescribing, that's quid pro quo.
And I do agree with Dr. Stossel 100% that 99% of what doctors do is ethical and above board. I think the temptation that the guy down the hall is getting this, I just think it's...
But the problem with the anecdote thing is, so a very famous HIV researcher, I was at a Merck meeting, and he said, we were talking about, he says, well, you know, this drug rep came and it just gave absolutely inappropriate advice, and I threw all the drug reps out. No more drug reps in the clinic. So I said, really, how many times did this happen? Well, once. Okay, now if somebody on your faculty says something that's inappropriate, do you fire the whole faculty? I mean, this is the baby in bathwater issue that we come against. Sorry.
Let's have one more question. How about over here in the middle?
Hi. I actually agree with you, Dr. Stossel, with what you were saying about anecdotal evidence. I have really pet peeve about that. I was wondering if either of you, do you have, can you cite any scientific or peer-reviewed, I don't want to say...
peer review is an evil word.
I know, I don't want to get into that. But peer-reviewed evidence from reputable journals showing a negative or positive outcome from specifically clinical outcome among doctors for receiving gifts from pharmaceutical companies.
Do you want to take this?
All right, so the answer is there is no evidence. Zero evidence. Now I'm going to tell you, last May, I published a paper in Nature Biotechnology. And it's sort of intuitively obvious, but we took 100+ papers that were published in the New England Journal, the JAMA, Lancet, you know, high-tier, top-tier journals, and asked the following questions. Did these papers emphasize the benefits or the risk of the interface? Did they present evidence to support that conclusion? Did they draw inferences about your question, about patient outcomes? Did they acknowledge there might be an other side to the question, and did they discuss it? The answer, 90% of the papers emphasized risk. Less than half presented any evidence. 2/3 made claims about patient outcomes. 15% even mentioned that there might be an alternate interpretation to what they've concluded, and 3% discussed it. So we're talking about bias. I mean, the bias is heavily on the side of instigation. Now, there's also a recent paper that came out in the Journal of Clinical Hypertension. Now, you know, there are many practices now that have thrown out drug reps. And I think it's interesting, GYN is the lowest. OBGYN, but general internal medicine, you know, a significant number. And so this allowed an economist at Temple University to compare the introduction of a new drug and a drug that got a black box warning that in these different practices, there were the practices that accepted drug reps and the practices that didn't accept drug reps. In the practices that had drug reps, the uptake of the newly introduced drug was faster and to a greater extent, and the decrease in prescribing of the black box drug, that was Avandia, was faster and to a greater extent. Now that's about as good, that's not on, because all the literature on patient outcomes is mostly surveys of doctors and attitudes and medical students. It would be very hard to get actual hard patient data. This is about as close as it comes. I mean, you still can't say, we don't know what the outcomes were, and it gets complicated. But I mean, that's a long-winded answer is no. I'm not sure it'd be easy to come by.
Right, and I agree with you. There are a variety of papers over the last 20 years that have shown inferences of the relationship between a physician and an industry rep, whether it's the frequency with which you have dinner, or the frequency with which you speak on behalf of that company. For example, one of them up actually at University Hospitals in Cleveland looked at the relative frequency that physicians asked for a drug to be added to the hospital's formulary. For those of you who don't know this, hospitals don't, if there's 10 ACE inhibitors out there, hospitals might have 3 or 4 on the formulary. There's 10 different types of a certain class of antibiotic. The hospitals might only have 3 or 4 to maximize their purchasing power and to make their costs lower. But so a physician will have to sometimes ask for a drug to be added to the formulary. And there's p-values of 0.005, 0.001 for the people that are more likely to have had a relationship with industry, they're more likely to request a drug to be in the formulary. Some of that makes sense. To your point, there's no negative patient outcome there, but I think there's...
These might have been good drugs. In fact, I know that study, that over half of the drugs were considered by the FDA used to rate the drugs as novel, and the formulary ended up accepting 90% of the recommendations. You know, so that paper's garbage, but
that's a lot of the studies that are out. No, I'm just saying that's a lot of the studies that are out there, are those sorts of things. There's another one from the Cleveland Clinic from about the same time that looked at people that went to a company-funded symposium versus people that didn't, from within the same group of physicians. I believe they were pediatric anesthesiologists or something, and the adoption of new drugs. And the adoption by the people that went to the conference is way above the national rate of adoption. Now, you can make the point that they're bringing innovation to the field more quickly. It could be a complete true and unrelated in terms of any negative outcome. I agree with him 100% on that.
So if you bear with me here for one second, because this gets to the AMSA thing. So you say, I will prescribe on the basis of, I guess I love AMSA. It's great that medical students have policy interests. And, you know, I think you need to be straightened out a little bit, but it'll come with experience. That on the basis of evidence, not promotion. Now let's think about that. I mean, this is something that I've been thinking recently, is that when companies go to the FDA, they have a pre-arranged package of information that has been negotiated. This is what you've got to show us in order to get this product approved. And every bit of that information has to go, if they can't hide anything. And who reviews it? Full-time paid FDA employees. And they're looking at original data. Now, this is getting onto if the information isn't coming from the companies, from the company marketing people, where is it coming from? Well, this is this myth, this legend that academic detailing, that the great academic institutions throwing journal papers around. Now, think about it. When the journals get highly refined data that goes to anonymous, unpaid reviewers and clueless, arrogant editors, so which of that information is actually better? Then we get to when the rep actually comes to the doctor, the rep can't say anything that hasn't been approved by the FDA. It's all regulated. The sign in the airport about James, that ain't regulated, and the academic detailers aren't regulated. So I think we should get as much information as we possibly can. The worst thing we can do, censorship is the worst thing. And so, but that's where this whole movement is taking us toward.
So I think we've ended on a topic where both of our debaters actually agree that the evidence, one way or the other, is startlingly lacking. There's one question here that was a great question, and it really talked about, gosh, if we knew, the question here is, if we knew that sales pitches bias clinicians, why do we allow sales reps to influence medical practice? It's kind of a great question, which is this circular argument here. So now we've got some time to go back onto your devices, text back to us your vote. Remember, if it's you agree, it's Dr. Stossel's. If you're in the opposition, it's Dr. Thomas. And if you're still undecided, that's okay too. Okay, here it is. The undecideds actually went down. The undecideds in the previous vote were about a third, 35% of the group, and now there's only 20% undecided. For Dr. Stossel's, in terms of the agree, in the previous vote, 43% of the folks in the audience were in agreement with your position. Post-voting, 49% were in agreement, so that's about 6 points difference. But for Dr. Thomas, 22% of the previous vote aligned with you, and post the debate now it's 32%. So you went up 10 points. So they declared for me the winner is you because you convinced more people to go your way.
So I love, now that's
Yay.
academia right there. I get less votes, but I win.
Story of my life, yeah.
Can we, weren't they great? You guys were great. So let us applaud you for being here at 8 o'clock and obviously engaged in a really important topic. Thank you. You want to go?
That's academia.
Hi, I'd like to just say a quick word. Congrats again to Dr. Thomas for winning the historic inaugural Arthur N. Roop debate at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. And I'd like to also thank Dean Poon, as she did just such a wonderful job moderating today. So if I get a round of applause for her, that'd be great. Anyways, we're really glad y'all came out, and we hope to continue to bring good programming, things that are unique and that'll really broaden your horizons as medical students in the future. So be on the lookout for events by Benjamin Rush Society, and thanks again to AMSA, as well as my crack team of Ankur, Chelsea, and Joe, who did a great job organizing. Thanks again, and drive home safe.